Hi, this is Brandon Splane from thirstgym.com. Today we're going to talk about laying out the dynamic effort lower method within the conjugate system. So we've already talked about the max effort method in terms of the upper body and lower body, which I'll link in the description box below for you to check out those. So today we're talking about the dynamic effort lower. Now, before we get started, the dynamic effort lower, popularized by Louis Simmons in the conjugate system, is going to be aimed at building your speed in the particular lifts of the squat and or the deadlift, typically on both lifts for that given day within the conjugate system. So what we're going to start here with our dynamic effort lower is we're going to make sure that the first two things we really want to checkpoint are that we're going to touch the squat and the deadlift in both of these sessions, okay? And so most people know that this is usually where you're gonna do box squats, bands, chains, things of that nature to increase your speed with the dynamic effort method. However, if you're not doing this for powerlifting, you can also use jumps, cleans, and different other explosive-based activities. But for us with powerlifting, we're talking about the squat and the deadlift. That can be conventional or sumo. So the first thing that we're gonna do here, and via Louis Simmons, is focusing on the speed squat, okay? And the first thing we want to notice about this movement here is that when Louis talks about these in terms of how we're gonna program this, generally we're gonna average around 25 lifts for the squat, okay? Now this can vary, this can be 20, this can be 30, it can be 24, really depends. Usually what you're gonna see with Louis Simmons from what he has written is that you're usually gonna do 8 to 10 sets of 2, and then that's gonna be anywhere usually between 50 and 60% of your 1 rep max, okay? Now I've changed these a little bit, but these are not including what you have in terms of the bands and chains, so you also wanna add in the accommodating resistance to that, which then is also gonna be around 25%. That's gonna give you 75 to 85%. Okay, and so what they found was that this let them be able to handle pretty heavy weight, at least at the top, but they're moving it for maximum intent and maximum force, all right? So for our speed squat here, this is gonna be our first exercise. This could be with box, bands, chains, safety bars, cambered bars. That all can vary, okay? So for our lifter, we're gonna say we're talking with the raw population still. This can be with or without a box. So for me, I'm gonna pretend that we're not doing this with a box, but it could also be a box squat as well. And then we're gonna say this is the beginning of a wave. And so for me personally, I like to start this at 40% and then do this for usually 12 sets of 2. Now, I said I mentioned that this can change, and so the reason we're gonna change this, I'm gonna talk about the waves here. Now, you can do 3-week, 4-week, you can even do 5-week based waves here, and that's really just gonna depend upon what you do. So if we're using our 40% example, very common ones would be 40, 45, 50. If we're sticking with 40, this would be 40, 43, 47, 50, and if we're doing a 5-week increment, that's gonna be 40, 42, 44, 47, and then 50, okay? So as you can see, these basically jump up 2 every single time, but to be able to get to that even 50 spot, you're gonna have to have a 3% jump here. Doesn't really matter how you do this. The goal is that you're gonna make sure you're doing doubles on all of these, and generally what happens is that as the percentage goes up, your sets are gonna go down a little bit. So for example, if I was going to do this one, I might be doing 12 sets here, 10 sets here, 8 sets here, okay? And again, if I like to, for the 4-week, I usually like doing 12, 12, 10, and 10. The other option is to go 12, 10, 10, and 8. That's also another really popular one. And then going with the 12 system here, you're gonna go 12, 12, 10, 10, and 8. That's usually a common way to progress your sets with your percentage points, okay? So how you're gonna do your waves here is completely up to you, okay? If you like doing 3-week waves or 4-week waves, or maybe it's somebody newer and you want to give them more exposure, so you do 5-week waves, it's all up to you, okay? Just understand it's gonna be a phasic structure, and this builds in a natural deload within the conjugate system of our dynamic effort work, because at the end of each wave, we're going back to that 40% or maybe 50%, depending on what you're using, but you're going back to that lower percentage and you're basically going to rerun it, okay? So that covers the speed squat in terms of what we're doing there. Now, the next part here that we're gonna have is going to be Usually a speed deadlift, and I'm going to talk about what we do here a little bit differently. And usually this is going to be, we're going to do the same thing, starting at the beginning of a wave, 50% give or take, and usually this is going to be for about 10 singles. This could also be for doubles. This could be less sets. It really kind of depends. What you're going to find here with the deadlift, so we're going to go back to the deadlift on this side. Usually what you're going to find here is 6 to 12 sets, okay? And typically you're only going to do 1 to 2 reps. And usually you're going to find that it sticks more towards that 1 rep, and you're only going to rest around 30 seconds or so between those. And then you're usually going to start that 50%. And then again, just like we did with those waves, again, you could have usually a 3-week wave, a 4-week wave, or a 5-week wave again. And generally you're going to see again this go 50, 55, 60, and just like what we did with our other ones, 50, 53, 57, 60, 50, 52, 54, 57, and 60, okay? If you were just gonna stay with the dynamic effort method, that's what you would do. These would all be for singles. So hypothetically, this would be 10, 8, 6. This would be 10, 10, 8, 8. This could be 10, 10, 8, 8, 6. Really just kind of depends on what you want to do here in terms of how you have your sets lined up and how many reps you're doing. Okay, so that would be how you're going to do the speed work for the pulls. And again, that's also going to be not including your accommodating resistance of the same thing of around 25% bands or chains. Now, option number 2, which is what I do, is I make this a max effort deadlift variation, and I go for a 1 RM at a RPE of 9 to 10. Now, you might be asking, why should I do the max effort deadlift on a dynamic effort day? So the first bullet point here that I'm going to talk about is that come meet day, you've always got a deadlift after you squat in a meet. Always. It's always going to happen, right? You're always going to take your 3 squats, your 3 bench presses, and then your 3 deadlifts. So knowing what it feels like to take a heavy deadlift after performing squats is going to give you a better indicator of where you actually are. The other thought process here too is that you're going to get activation from the squat, which is then going to help you improve your output for the deadlift, okay? So if you're really firing on all cylinders here, you're good warmed up, you develop that speed and pop, and you're now going to transfer that over into your deadlift when it comes to taking max effort attempts, okay? So those are kind of the 2 reasons here that you might do that. Now the other thing that I'm going to talk about is why I did this, and I've talked about this in my max effort upper videos, how we're laying things out, that if we've got our max effort lower, we've got our max effort upper, our DE lower, and then our DE upper, which we'll get to in a future video. Essentially we want to make sure that we're obviously taking a squat here and a bench press here, and we're obviously going to take another bench press here. We're still going to squat, but that's going to be sub-max. This seems like a great place to put that heavy deadlift so that we've got enough space between these days. My max effort day isn't going to affect my dynamic effort lower day as long as they're not butted up back to back. So as long as there's an off day here in between, there's an off day in between here, then typically having 2 days back to back here is not so bad, so that this probably is going to affect my dynamic effort upper because I'm just after speed. My bench press is going to have ample recovery by the time I get here, and then any accessory work is just going to be basically carried over to the following week. That's not going to affect my max effort upper. So as you can see, we're kind of looking at how sessions are going to affect future sessions that are to come. Now, what I like to mention here with this is that with our heavy deadlift, this is only an every other week thing. So the reason I like this is that every other week is that you're taking a speed pull and a max effort pull twice in a month. You're gonna have ample recovery for each heavy deadlift that you take. And then by taking heavy singles, you're really gonna work on your positioning off the floor, and you're also gonna ensure that you're not doing too much volume on your deadlift. You're gonna practice your setup repeatedly on the dynamic effort day. And then you're also gonna get that practice on your setup on the max effort day, but underneath heavy loads. So you're training it in 2 different positions on the force velocity curve in a tight window in terms of a month. You would never want to try to do these back to back. That would be incredibly hard to recover from. So by doing this every other week, that's what that's going to look like. Now, I'm going to lay out what an example might be. So if we're a raw lifter, we might actually do like a deficit deadlift here. Okay. And then that's obviously still going to be for our 1 RM. And then our speed deadlift, this might be for spans, and then we're going to stick with that. Okay, so depending upon what week you have, this would be week A, and this would be week B, you would just determine what you're going to do for that particular week. Now we're going to move on to our supplemental and accessory work on the dynamic effort lower day. Now this is where things get a little bit more complicated because it's going to kind of depend on what we're doing on our deadlift. Our speed deadlifts are going to stay pretty similar throughout our cycles. Like we said, it's just going to wave as we kind of mentioned earlier. But I'm going to break this down of what I like to do depending upon what I have for my deadlift day. So if I have, we're going to put A over here. If I'm doing a speed deadlift day, then the supplemental work that I want to do, I want it to be a higher rep deadlift based activity that's going to help me and usually more volume. So this could be a good morning, this could still be a deadlift variation, this could be like a snatch grip, this could be more deficit work. So if you really want to hammer deficit work, you could here. This could also be a any kind of Anderson work or anything from pins. You can even do RDLs here. You can do stiff leg deadlifts. These are all fantastic things to do in this C1 area. So if I put it here, I'm kind of running out of room, but essentially if I'm going to do a C1, let's just say that we're going to do an RDL. We're early here and we're going to do say 3 sets of 8. Okay, so this is quite a bit of volume for our glutes and our hamstrings with a heavy compound movement. Now, if I'm taking a deficit deadlift, I flip that on its coin. Since this nervous system output is incredibly high, right? It's super heavy. You're only taking 1 rep. You know you're going to be physically drained from a nervous system perspective. Then what I like to do for this activity here is then now make this essentially a hard set of like 5 to 6. We'll just put 8 because I will use 8 sometimes too. But you can even go as low as 3. So I'll give you say 3s to 8s. It really just depends on the activity that you're choosing here. So we're just gonna say, for example, if I'm using RDLs here, glutes and hamstrings are heavy, posterior chain work needs developed quite a bit more. So thinking of that, I might do a safety squat bar good morning here, or we talked about the deficit deadlift being my main movement. If I really want to continue to work from a deficit perspective, if we want to be a little bit more specific for this ideal lifter, then I might actually do a snatch grip block pull, okay? And the reason I'm going to do this, it's going to develop upper back strength. So I have to work on pushing from the floor, keeping my lats engaged. So we work over a hard set of 3. For this program here, we're going to say we're going to work up to a hard set of 5 at an RPE of 8. Okay, so I'm not full sending it here. I'm leaving some reps in the tank, but I'm really making sure that I'm working on this snap grip variation that's going to help my positioning for my deficit deadlift. And again, that's going up the chain, which we've talked about in other videos of how things build up. Now, that leaves us with a little bit of room for accessory work, okay? Now, I'm gonna make kind of 2 different things here. These doesn't really matter a whole lot, but from a D1 perspective, I still like to do something single leg and ideally posterior chain heavy. I've already done a deadlift or an RDL variation here, so I don't really need to check that box here quite as much. So this can usually be usually like a single leg RDL or a lateral lunge or a single leg back extension. Usually that's the kind of things that I'm thinking here because I've already got the RDL checked. I might go with another split squat variation, especially if my squat happens to be on the weaker end. But what we're going to do here to kind of check 2 birds with 1 stone, we're going to continue to develop the posterior chain. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to make this a single leg reverse hyper. Okay, it's going to be a little bit lower, but it's not going to be super taxing. And then I might do that for say 3 by 12 per side, okay? And to end things off, I'm gonna go with my E1 here, and I'm gonna pick abs, just like I did with my max effort lower. I'm gonna pick an ab variation and another posterior chain based activity. So what I'm gonna do here for this lifter that's struggling with their deficit deadlift, I'm gonna give them a glute ham raise, and we're just gonna do 3 by max. Okay, make it as close as we can. And our E2, we might do standing abs here, or you can even do, you know, reverse crunches, whatever, doesn't really matter. The other option here as well, since I do a lot of flexion work on my squat days, the other option here is to pick something that's not flexion based. So knowing what I've already done on the first day, I'm going to design this with that day in mind, but understand that standing abs, reverse crunches, anything like that, check the box very well. But also so do planks, dead bugs, fallouts, and things of that nature. So we're gonna just make this the ab wheel, and we're going to make this for 3 sets of 10 to 12, okay? So looking at my session here, we're gonna break this down one by one. You're always gonna speed squat as your first exercise. 40 to 50% is kind of where you start. Again, you really just wanna make sure you have plenty of speed and pop. If you really wanna be anal about it and you're looking at a VBT system, you're usually gonna look at 0.8 to 1.0 meters per second. It's kind of the speed that you're looking for. But what I really look for here is just make sure we've got pop. There's lots of speed, and we wanna make sure that our rest stays around 60 seconds, okay? Not too much rest. Should be able to go, 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 go. Be able to get this done in 12 minutes, essentially. Then, if we're going with an 8 week, for example, I'm gonna speed deadlift. We got this against bands. Same thing with this, be bands or chains here. 50% for 10 by 1. Again, we're still looking for that pop, but we're only gonna rest 30 seconds here. So essentially, we're gonna pull deadlift, step away, shake it out, catch our breath, go again, pull. Really gonna work on setting that up every single time. If you're on a B week, so now this is a max effort week, okay? You're not gonna do this. You're gonna now do your max effort work. We're gonna do a deficit deadlift. And again, specify how much deficit you want. We'll just say 2 inches. And then you're gonna work up to a 1 rep max. And the same thing is gonna be an RP 9 to 10. We're just gonna stay on RP 9 for this example. Wanna make sure to leave a little bit left in the tank. Now, going to our accessory work. Depending upon what you're gonna do. If we were on our speed day, again, I like a little bit more volume. Again, we've already got volume here. We're gonna continue to push the volume. 3 sets of 8, really focusing on eccentrics here and really trying to build up the glutes and the hamstrings there. If we did our max effort pull, since we got that high CNS based output, we're gonna continue to keep that high. We're gonna kind of cluster those together via Charlie Francis, the high-low method. High nervous system stuff stays together when you can keep it together. So a snatch grip block pull, working up to a hard set of 5 at RP 8. Those block pulls could be about 3 to 4 inches if you wanna be specific, but essentially you just wanna make sure it's gonna be right below the knee. Then your accessory work follows down for what you need from there. This can change quite a bit. For this purpose for today, we're just gonna keep these accessory works the same for this particular session. So again, I like some kind of single leg exercise, if at all possible, if you can get in here, especially if you didn't get it on that first max effort day. Definitely want something here. If you did and you wanna try to go with something that's double leg, that's totally fine. You can make this like goblet squats or a leg press. You could certainly do glute ham raises here, inverse curls, reverse hypers, pull throughs, anything that's kind of posterior chain related is gonna be great. If you're really weak in your quads or your squat, you can add in some extra quad work here if you really need to. But generally, I think about my accessory work on this day, always trying to help my deadlift, okay? Then the last little bit here, your lighter accessory work, back and forth, essentially no rest, abs, and some kind of posterior chain-based work, reverse hypers, glute hams, pull throughs. You can even do extra leg curl work, leg extension work if you feel like you need some more of that quad stuff. Anything like that, that's gonna be the lower level accessory work, kind of get the blood flowing before you get out for that particular session. Now that we've got this all wrapped up, hopefully you can see how the dynamic effort lower system can really help with your squat and your deadlift. I'm gonna kind of touch on some very nuanced things with this aspect of the dynamic effort method within the system and what things you want to keep track of. So since we've already covered the actual programming side and we kind of talked about the waves, the big thing that we want to talk about now and accommodating resistance and box squats and how this can or can't help, okay? So again, we're gonna assume that we're talking about a raw lifter in this case, okay? So things you want to kind of check out is that if you're box squatting on your max effort day, then you want to make sure your DE is no box. Okay, I believe as a raw lifter, you need to free squat at least once a week. So if you're taking a box squat on your max effort day, more cases than not, at least for me, your dynamic effort work on your squats is not going to use a box, okay? The second thing, understand the difference between bands and chains and which one you need, okay? If you are a slow lifter, okay, I mean, like, you can grind reps out, then you want to use bands more cases than not, especially on your squat, but even on your deadlift, okay? This is gonna teach you to be fast. These people, slower lifters, are probably gonna need lower percentages, okay? Since they are not fast, give them the ability to be fast by keeping your percentages in the lower ranges than you normally would. You can build them up over time, especially if you feel like you need to, but start there. The opposite, so I mean, it's kind of bullet point 3, but essentially the opposite, if you've got a fast lifter, then you probably want to do more chains, and it's still going to keep them fast, but you're going to find that you probably are going to need to increase your percentages just a little bit. Because they're so fast, they're going to be higher towards this 1.0 meters per second. You are going to want to get them closer to that 0.08, especially at the end of a training block, all right? Now, the other thing I'm going to talk about here in terms of the bands and the chains is that from a chain perspective, you want to make sure that these are always on the ground, always grounded, and you want to make sure that the chain weight does not exceed the bar weight, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So, you know, if you're speed squatting 150, you do not want 150 pounds of chain. Something is wrong with your math. This should never be basically the same as your chain weight. If you are in doubt and you are a raw lifter, if you're in doubt, decrease your chain weight and just do more straight weight, okay? Now, the next thing is gonna be, well, Brandon, what about if I don't have bands and chains? What do I do? Okay, so that's called compensatory acceleration training, or CAT, okay? These are gonna be your percentages if you do not have bands and chains. My recommendation is going to be to start at 65% and build up to around 80%, okay? Now, the easiest way to find this is to do your sets until they feel slow, okay? So you're gonna have almost like an experimental wave. You're gonna do your sets of 2 until it feels slow. Let's say for you, that's around 75%. You just found the top end of your DE work, okay? 75%. Now what we gotta do is go back to the back end. That's gonna leave you at 65% as your bottom, 75% as your top, and that's gonna give you a good place for your speed work without any bands or chains. Now, it's not gonna be the exact same, but it will, as long as you're giving intent to your speed work, this will still help you to some degree. And I even like to use straight weight as I get closer to a meet so that athletes are ready to what those lifts feel like without the bands and the chains on there. Now, the other final thing that I'll talk about here in terms of your waves is, Brandon, what if I see more than 2 reps on squat or a single on deadlift? So I'll give you some different samples of things you can do. So for your squat waves, these can be things like 5x5. You can do 10x3. We already talked about 12x2. You can even do 15x2. I've even started athletes as low as this. This obviously is going to be usually a lower percentage, okay? But you can start this high, And then on your deadlift, typically, again, you're gonna see like 10 by 1 or 12 by 1, but you can even do 8 by 2, 6 by 3. I've even done 7 by 3 before. And then I think, yeah, you can even do 10 by 2. That's the one I left off. So these are kind of like the popular waves that I like to use. And again, these are the higher ends, so they would go down. Let's say this would go to 6 by 1. This would probably go to 8 by 1. This would probably go down to 5 by 2. This would probably go down to 4 by 3. This would probably go down to 5 by 3. And this would probably go down to 6 by 2. So it gives you an idea of kind of where you can start your waves, where you're gonna end, and you get the same idea here. Now, the 5 by 5 method, this is quote unquote a lazy way to do speed work, okay? Because your first rep is gonna be super fast and your 5th rep's probably not gonna quite be there. But what I like about this is that it teaches athletes to consistently put effort into the bar, and this builds a lot of GPP for a lot of athletes. So doing 5 by 5 of a 40, 45, 50 wave, if you're doing 5 by 5 at all these, obviously your volume is going to go up over the course of the wave. This is going to get incredibly difficult as you go, but one thing to notice here, as you're doing this, are you feeling more in shape? Do you feel like you're still applying a lot of speed into the barbell at this 50%, assuming you're using bands and chains still, and that's going to help you lay out those waves. So again, there's a lot of options there for you. You can kind of pick and choose based on what you want. And what I will end you with on the waves here, before we wrap this up, is that for beginners, okay, I'm gonna kind of draw like a continuum here. Okay, for beginner to advanced, these people need more total reps, okay, lower percentage, and they need to make sure that technique comes first, okay? So we really want to focus on the quality of first reps here a lot. Knowing that, I prefer 12 sets of 2, okay? Because I'm getting 12 first bar lifts, all right? It's 24 total reps, but if I did 3 sets of 8, not for speed work, just hypothetically, I'm only getting 3 first reps here versus my 12. So this person is getting more technical practice from a setup, squat down, back up, than this person's who's 3 setups, squatting, and those last couple reps, let's just say reps 6, 7, and 8, start to technically break down. We only got 5 quality reps here. We're here, I'm probably gonna make sure I get 24 quality reps because my technique shouldn't break down in 2 reps. The advanced lifter is almost gonna be the opposite, okay? We wanna probably have less total reps, more cases than not always. We're probably gonna have a higher percentage because they actually understand how to apply as much force they can to the barbell so they can get more stimulus from that. And then we also want to make sure that we can start to vary our bars to mix things up, okay? So we're going to get a lot of variation here in the advanced population with our speed work versus we're not so much for our beginners. Our deadlifts are probably going to stay competition movements. Our squats are probably going to be with the stray bar, more cases than not. That's all pretty straightforward. Here we can actually use safety bars for our squats, cambered bars for our squat. We can perform our deadlifts out of pins, off of blocks, in various stances. Okay, we can work on that here because this person's more advanced. They can use more variety to build their deadlift or their squat. This person, not so much. The very last thing of this is you want to make sure that you base your percentage off the bar that you're using. Okay, so if let's just say hypothetically, I'm gonna erase some of this so you can get this here. We want to make sure that since we're basing our percentage off the bar, let's just say my max squat is 400 pounds, okay? So if we go off of my percentage, 40% of that is going to be 160, okay? So I would be 160 for 12 by 2. That would be my normal squat cycle with bands or chains. Let's say my SSB max squat though is 350, okay, there's a 50-pound discrepancy. If I'm basing this number off of this, I'm doing 160 into that is almost 50%, okay? So this would normally be 40%, 160 ran into 350. I'm not the greatest at math off the top of my head. We're just gonna say that's around 46%. It's probably pretty close. Now I'm doing 46% for 12 by 2 to start my cycle. That means I'm gonna end probably around 56%. I've overshot my 50. I'm probably no longer in this range, okay? So if I'm gonna run my 40% off this should actually be 140 for 12 by 2. So make sure you're basing your percentages off the bars that you're using or the variations you're using. The same thing goes if you're doing your pulls off of a deficit, then the same thing would occur. You want to base your percentages off the deficits. So that covers the dynamic effort method. I know I talked a lot about a bunch of different things within that system of the conjugate system. Make sure the big thing is that you're squatting for speed, you're deadlifting for speed. If you're like me, you want to take my ideas here, pull heavy every other week, whether that be odd weeks 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, whether it be even weeks 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. You leave that up to you. The big thing you've got to remember with that though is you got to know where your meet day is, and you got to kind of work backwards a little bit and figure out what day is going to work best to put this on. Is it going to be best on an odd week or an even week? That's totally up to you in terms of your recovery, but something worth noting. If you're deadlifting heavy, keep your nervous system high. So again, you want to have the high system and the low system. So if you're taking heavy deadlift, you want heavy supplemental. If you've got speed deadlift, you want to have volume supplemental. And again, that's totally up to you. 3 by 8, 3 by 6, 4 by 8, 5 by 5. You got lots of different options here. Again, try to make this usually around 20 to 25 reps of supplemental work, and you're going to find that's going to help your deadlift. After this, your accessory work is then going to go to posterior chain, abs, and just make sure you check some single leg work somewhere in your training program so that your hips feel good all year round. So that's what I've got here for the dynamic effort lower system in terms of how I use things. Make sure you check out the other videos like I mentioned, the max effort upper and the max effort lower from previous videos. And next week, we'll be talking about the dynamic effort upper in terms of the conjugate system, what I mix up with that to help make that progressing for raw lifters. We're gonna build off some of what we talked about today, but you wanna make sure you tune in for that video, as again, I've got some tweaks that are probably gonna help your bench press. Thanks again for checking in. We'll see you next week. Have a great day.